Sad sack Private Grant Shapps, otherwise known as Green, and sundry other aliases in his inglorious business career before becoming Britain's Defence Secretary, has never heard a shot fired in anger, not even on a hunt. He's not got the class to be on a hunt. Well, he threatened Russia yesterday that Britain was going to put soldiers into Ukraine, and the Royal Navy was going to somewhere find ships to send into the naval encounters against the Russian naval forces. Today, Corporal Rishi Sunak, beleaguered in Liverpool, demonstrators surrounding the Conservative Party conference slapped Private Shapps / Green down and said he'd just made it all up. It was absolute rubbish. In a second shot for NATO, the anti-NATO candidate wins the general election in Slovakia. Now NATO has more than one opponent inside its ranks. And we'll be looking at the New York City thug, Jamal Bowman, the man who talked about the hallowed halls of Congress in relation to January 6th, wrecking the joint, pulling the fire alarm, all to avoid a vote. Oh, and we've got the former wife of the greatest, the champion, Muhammad Ali. Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
And we've got a potentially record-breaking poll also. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offence? Yes or no? 20,000 people have already voted and the show has just begun. Get your vote in now, yes or no, on my Telegram channel, on my Twitter feed, on the YouTube community stream, or on the YouTube stream that you may well be watching. Do you remember they said that the January 6th protesters had desecrated the hallowed halls of the US Congress? Do you remember the hushed tones with which they described these bison-hatted, bead-wearing buffalo soldiers strolling through the corridors of the US Congress? Well, get this. A Democratic Party congressman, a man I've just seen behaving in a way that you no longer see outside bars in Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow, whilst berating another member of Congress, a name that you may not yet be familiar with outside of the United States, but a former member of the Squad, a man who was supposed to be a political progressive. In order to save Joe Biden's budget, including gigantic tranches of new money for weapons for the Kiev regime in the war in Ukraine, he actually triggered a fire alarm. He broke the glass and pulled the string, or whatever they have in Washington, D.C., in order to create a fire emergency, placing people at risk, sending the fire department hard-pressed in New York City, as he should know, no less hard-pressed in Washington, D.C., triggering them onto an emergency footing, all to avoid a vote which might have cost Biden's budget for war, weapons, missiles, and bombs. There he is there on my screen now. This thug should no longer be serving in the US Congress. It is not just a crime in the United States, it is a felony in the United States to unlawfully and unwarrantedly trigger a fire alarm and a fire emergency, akin to shouting fire in a darkened cinema. This man is not fit to wear the clothes of an American congressman and should be drummed out of office. Unless they were being hypocritical about the January 6th affair. Do you think that's even remotely possible, that that could be true? But that was the least of the setbacks for NATO over this weekend. The biggest of them was undoubtedly the stunning defeat suffered by the pro-American, pro-NATO, pro-Ukrainian regime in Slovakia. They were defeated by a man whose campaign was based around his first act, which he promised would be the immediate and complete cessation of all aid, military and economic, from Slovakia to the kleptocratic regime in Kiev. He said the Soviet Union liberated us from the Nazis. It's time to show Russia some respect. He's being described by a series of hysterics in the media as pro-Putin, pro-Russian. Apparently, Putin has done it again, influenced the outcome of yet another poll in yet another country, having elected Donald Trump in the first place. Now he's picking the prime ministers in Slovakia. Well, this is a major problem for the EU and for NATO, because this man has a veto. This man can veto EU decisions. This man can veto NATO decisions. And allied with the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, there is now a significant blocking mechanism for those who wish to give away the economic future of Europe's children and grandchildren to the creep Zelensky is now in grave danger. Their majority has gone. We have a mover and we have a seconder for an alternative point of view. This is very significant indeed. And in Britain, we, forgive us, had the most significant victory for us of all. There's a man called Grant Shapps, whom I've been lampooning on radio and television for the best part of 20 years, since he entered my field of vision as Grant Shapps. A huckster is how you would describe him. In the Second World War, he'd have been called a spiv. He's a man with a motley business career behind him, a business career littered in failure and falsification. He was caught falsifying his name. That's right. Britain has a defense secretary who habitually and for self-interested reasons pretended to be someone else. A Michael Green is the name that has stuck in my mind, but there were actually multiple aliases under which he sought to conduct business. In fact, in an early sign of the times, sometimes when he was signing letters, he was a woman. He was identifying as a woman. Not Michelle Mone, but something not dissimilar. If you get my drift, British viewers will understand. This man ended up as a Conservative MP, though he could well have ended up in many other places. But he ended up as a Conservative MP and then held more government offices than almost anyone in history in the dog days of the Boris Johnson and Liz Truss administration. I've lost track of how many ministerial posts he's had, but he was then shunted to the periphery by Rishi Sunak. And then, when the Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, he of the Battle of Balaclava, stepped down from office, inexplicably, Rishi Sunak sent for Grant Shapps, Michael Green, Michelle Mone et al. And no one could quite understand it. Some thought it was a subversive move to undermine Britain's military. After all, which of the officer class is going to take orders willingly from this little twerp, this little spiv? But others thought, well, it's a sign that he's downgrading the importance of the war and the importance of Britain's contribution to it. But the thing about a spiv is he loves the attention. And so this particular spiv yesterday told the Daily Telegraph, the Conservative Party's paper of record, that alone of all the NATO countries, officially, Britain was going to send its armed forces, who could all fit into Villa Park in Birmingham, by the way, in toto, Army, Navy, and Air Force. He was going to send them, boots on the ground and all, into Ukraine. To train the Ukrainians, don't you know? They're badly in want of our training. That's why they're doing so well in the war. And not only that, he threatened to send the Royal Navy into naval encounters with the nuclear-armed Russian Navy. Now, I was a member of Parliament for many decades, representing a naval shipbuilding yard. I was forever agitating for the Royal Navy to be brought up to strength and for the shipyard in my constituency to build the resulting ships. So I keep a weather eye on the Royal Navy. And the last time I looked, Britain's Navy cannot police the English Channel, where thousands of people cross illegally into Britain to be shipped to 4-star hotels forever, perhaps, at the British taxpayers' expense. The Royal Navy is unable to stop them. But we're going to fight the Russian Navy in the Black Sea. This ranks up there with the most unbelievable statements made by Ben Wallace that he was going to avenge his regiment's ignominy when they were slaughtered at the Battle of Balaclava in the Crimean War more than 150 years ago. Ben was still smarting from the march of the ride of the 600 into the Russian guns. But Grant Shapps has outdone himself, I thought, when I thought of Britain's emaciated Royal Navy with 2 aircraft carriers that are non-functioning being sent to fight the Russian Navy. Now, I was just getting over the shock of this and trying to look on the bright side, that this would surely be the end of Grant Shapps' military career. The first time a Russian missile landed on top of the British soldiers, that would surely be it. When out came Rishi Sunak, believe it or not, Britain's Prime Minister. As Joe Biden put it, go figure. Rishi Sunak told the world in public that Shapps was talking through his hat, that no British soldiers would officially be sent into Ukraine. The idea that there are none there already in secret is, of course, entirely fanciful. But an actual deployment, officially, of British soldiers in Ukraine would be the beginning of World War III. An engagement between the emaciated Royal Navy and the Russian Navy would be like the Yangtze incident when the fledgling Chinese Navy in 1949 sank the Sapphire. It would be a humiliation for Britain's armed forces. And that's presumably why Rishi Sunak has countermanded Private Grant Shapps' orders. If not, a resignation from Mr. Green Shapps, surely a sacking is now in order. Britain's armed forces may be small, but they are highly skilled and professional people. They are people that are devoted to their country. They are people that we would rely on to defend us were anyone to attack us. They deserve better than Grant Shapps, don't they? Let me have your point of view. Now, coming up very soon, we have the former wife of Muhammad Ali. That's not all she's done in her life. Of course, she's an actress, an author, as well as being the author of one or two of the finest bon mots ever uttered by the most eloquent, articulate sportsman that has ever lived on planet Earth. And so to set the scene, I thought I'd tell just a couple of personal anecdotes. My father, God rest his soul, was the only person I knew, and all the people I knew when Cassius Clay, as he then was, took the World Heavyweight Boxing Championship, were all white people. And none of them liked Clay Ali. None of them. In fact, many of them hated him. He was the Louisville Lip. He was a black man that didn't lower his eyes when white people talked to him. He was a black man who could not only outfight anybody else, but outtalk them and look much prettier than them whilst doing so. So I got up in the middle of the night when I was 9 years old to watch Cassius Clay whop the big ugly bear Sonny Liston and become the heavyweight champion of the world and declare, somewhat over the top, screaming over the ropes, I am the greatest, I am the prettiest. And he was the greatest and the prettiest. And so I followed Ali in wonder, in admiration and love, as he fought a series of contenders and then fought his biggest ever battles against the United States government, which, in order to close his mouth, maybe for good, decided to conscript him and send him to fight in Vietnam. Ali refused to fight them Viet Cong, as he put it. He said this war is about white men sending black men to kill red men, to kill. He bamboozled them completely with a series of statements that were in themselves incontestable. That this was a government that was conscripting overwhelmingly black fighters, and many white ones too, many Latino ones too, to go and kill yellow men in the paddy fields of Vietnam, when those yellow men, as Ali put it, had never done him any harm. As he put it, and we'll discuss this in just a minute with his former wife, no Viet Cong ever called me the N-word. But of course, many in the United States had done so. When Ali came home from the Olympic Games, literally wearing the Olympic gold medal that he had won for the US Olympic team, he tried to enter a restaurant in his home city of Louisville, Kentucky, and was told that people like him were not served in this restaurant. At which point he went to a bridge over the river in the city and tossed his Olympic gold medal away. It was, I think, a turning point for him. But I've only got time to tell you about what remains the greatest epiphany of my entire life. Having followed Ali all these years, I was at a Labour Party conference in Blackpool when he had his most legendary of all his many legendary fights against George Foreman. I got up again in the middle of the night and went to a cinema, because that's the only way you could watch boxing then. Closed circuit cinema in Blackpool. And I watched, there it is there, as Ali roped the dope, soaked up the punishment, and then in a flurry that will never ever be forgotten, came off the ropes. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, down went the colossus that was George Foreman, the world's most fearsome and heavy puncher. And as Ali raised his arms, having won the world title yet again, I never in my whole life, before or since, experienced a sense of epiphany quite like that one. That's why I'm particularly happy that my guest is Dr. Khalilah Camacho Ali, actress, author, and former wife of Muhammad Ali. And by the way, she's just as eloquent as he was. Stay tuned.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
I've met Dr. Ali before on a previous television show that I had, which will remain nameless for reasons of algorithmic suppression. And I know for a fact she is the brightest and the best. And she's just finished her new book on her former husband, Muhammad Ali. How lucky are we, Dr. Ali, to see you here again, this time on the Mother of All Talk Shows. It is simply wonderful to see you, resplendent as ever. Tell us, first of all, about the book. What's it called? Where can we get it? And what period does it cover?
Well, it's good to see you, Mr. Galloway. You are amazing. You still look very dashing as usual. You aged beautifully. You're so handsome with the little peach fuzz. That's nice. That's a good look. Before you had nothing but on your face. You was clean, smooth, and now you look a little mature gentleman now. You look good. You look good, Mr. Galloway. You look great. I love your topics, your shows. You're amazing.
Thank you.
If Muhammad Ali was here, he would say, man, you trying to be prettier than me?
That could never happen, so and neither as eloquent as he. I mean, you were married to one of the most handsome and eloquent men, and if you put those two things together, the most handsome, eloquent man ever to walk God's earth. That's really something.
Yeah, I like the pretty boys. But this is the thing. It took a long time for me to finally put the book together. It took a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, things I had to heal. That's why I didn't do it before during his period, because divorce is never a nice thing. It's not a good thing. It's something that's very unexpected. I wanted to be married to him for the rest of my life, but things change, and I understand that. And it took a lot of time. The only thing about it is that during our divorce, I decided to just be friends and forgive each other for whatever we've done to each other. That was very hard to get over. But I decided, I said, look, man, we need to stay friends. We have beautiful children. We're going to stay friends no matter what. And so we did. He accepted that and said, yes, we're going to stay friends. You better be careful because we might fall in love again. I said, no. It's what it is. It's going to be okay. We have our 4 children. So it was a beautiful time with us because it was around his career. I was there for him in his hard, trying times. And it was just a beautiful relationship. It was a Cinderella story. I've been exposed to so many people and so much wisdom. And it's because of our friendship and our bondage that we had together that nobody will ever be able to understand. This is why the book is going to be covering the struggles that we went through together as a family. They say that Muhammad Ali suffered and he went through this and he went through that, but he didn't do it alone. He was with us. So he had a family going through it with him. So I can say that I was happy to go through it with him, to be very supportive of him. And we're going to keep the Ali legacy going because we made that legacy together as a family. And no matter what anybody says, I don't know. Yeah, you're going to say something?
I was going to ask, when you first met him, did it remotely occur to you that Muhammad Ali would become the most famous person on the earth? Were you aware of how big a personality he was going to be?
Well, I saw that, and he didn't see the big part of it. I saw a man that had potential. I saw a young man who had a lot of talent, and in order for him to survive this talent, being with my religion and supporting him in that religion, I knew it would make him bigger than what he even dreamed he would be. Yes, he had talent, but the controversial part is where we came in at. He is an expert when it comes to boxing. He had a certain style that nobody had. But I saw that potential blooming into something bigger. And I mean world bigger. He didn't see what I saw. He see what he saw as being a great champion. But I saw something bigger of him being a humanitarian, a person who would influence others. And that's what I focused on. And see, a lot of people come to me and ask me, what is it like being married to this great Muhammad Ali? Well, you have to understand, he wasn't always that great the way he is now. He wasn't that great then. He had to grow into that. That took time. That took struggle. That took sacrifice. All of that came before what you see now today. So I was with him in a different caliber. He was a talented person. He was very talkative, like you said, the Louisville Lip. But when he came with me, he had more to talk about other than just boxing. And that's why I stuck with the guy, you know what I mean? So, I do, of course, know what you mean. I made the point earlier, he had some very, very tough opponents. George Foreman was a very tough guy. Joe Frazier was a very tough guy. He fought and beat. Sonny Liston was a very tough guy. He beat him twice, stopped him twice. Now, any one of these, you would normally say, was his most fearsome opponent. But his biggest opponent was the U.S. government in the end, wasn't it? Yeah, that was a big one. That's the one I had to stand with him, by him with, and guide him through that. That's where I came in at. And I was the voice behind the man.
Tell us what that was like. I was the voice
behind the man.
Yeah, what was that like?
Well, especially when he was, I told him, as a kid, I understand that they had drafted him. And before we married, he said, I'm going to go to Vietnam. They said I'm going to go to Vietnam, but I don't want to fight anybody. They said that it would be okay for me to fight like Joe Louis fought for the Army and everything, but fight in the ring like a boxer, like Joe Louis did. And I said, that's not going to fly well. That is not a good move. You shouldn't even sign your name on anything like that because you can't trust a person who don't support you. So it's best not to sign your name at all. Don't even join in the Army because my father was a veteran. And he said, you're not supposed to even draft people twice. Once they reject you once, you don't draft them twice. It was against the law to draft anybody twice. They drafted him twice so he could be an example. And I told him, do not sign and go to the Army. I know he didn't want to go to the Army to fight anybody. And I told him, I said, well, you know, the Vietnamese have never lied to you and treated you bad and hung you on a tree and said that you wasn't a intelligent citizen of the world. And this is what the slave mentality had taught a lot of Black people back in that day. And I said, man, don't sign your name on a paper. We're Muslims. We sacrifice our lives for our beliefs. And the best thing you could do is don't sign your name to go to the Army to fight in a ring. You can't sign your name for anything. He said, really? I said, no. I said, he said, what would you do if you was me? You already gave me a poem for Sonny Liston, and I was only 13 then. And I told him, and when I was 14, I said, you want to know what I would do? I would say, hell no, I ain't going to go. Clean out my cell. Take me to jail without bail. Hell no. That's what I would do. But see, I didn't tell Clay to go out there and tell those people that. He repeated everything I said, went and told those people. Now I'd have created a monster. So that was my feeling on it. And he believed whatever I felt, and he would have put it out there because I influenced him to do that. I didn't tell him to do it, but he did it because he liked what he heard. And that's when it started a big controversy. A lot of people don't know that about him and I. That's the thing. This is what this book is about, telling the little intricate things that inspired him. I was the one that inspired him to do things, and that's what he liked about me. I inspired him.
You gave him some of his best lines, and you've just quoted one of them there, hell no, I won't go. You also gave him other, now famous, and at the time incredibly electrifying. I mean, the things he said about why he wouldn't go to Vietnam. You are responsible for some of those best lines.
Absolutely.
Now that he's only watching from above, take some credit.
Yeah. But when I look at me supporting him all these years, I looked at us as a team. Whatever I said, he would say. I was very influential for him. And I was glad he listened to me. He listened to everything I said, and he liked what he heard, and he brought that out. And that was my whole intentions, is to give him enough inspiration to bring it out. I didn't know he would actually do it, but he did. And the Sonny Liston thing, I was only like 13 when he called me and said, I'm going to, we were just friends. You know, I was in the school of Elijah Muhammad. We were just friends. And I told him I didn't like Sonny Liston because before he even became a Muslim, Sonny Liston said he was going to knock out that Black Muslim. And that hurt my feelings. And I said, I don't like this guy. So I wrote a poem for Clay when he came back to the mosque. I wrote a poem for him and said, look, you tell this to Sonny Liston because I don't like him. And I wrote it on a brown paper bag. And my dad saw Clay on TV with a brown paper bag reading the poem. And then my father asked me, he said, did you give a fighter a poem to read on a brown paper bag? I said, yeah. How did you find that out? And he said, well, he's on TV blazing away. So I go, what? And then I go and I see him with the brown paper bag, holding it up like this and reading it. And there was a little short poem. It was called I Am the Greatest, that I wrote when I was 13. And the poem said,
tell us.
This is the legend of, how you want me to tell you the poem?
Yes.
You want me to tell you? This is the legend of Cassius Clay, the most beautiful fighter in the world today. This fist fight's great. He's got speed and endurance. But if you're trying to sign to fight him, increase your insurance. This kid's got a left. This kid's got a right. Look at the kid carry the fight. Oh, the crowd is getting frantic. There's not enough room. There Ali lowers the boom. That was the upgrade. Who would have thought when they came to the fight, they see a spook satellite? No one would dream when they put down their money. They see a total eclipse of the sun. You made my point famous. I thank you for that.
That is
I thank you for
absolutely
that.
brilliant. Dr. Ali, how can people get the book? Can we pre-order
Oh,
it?
you can go on Amazon. Yeah, you can go on Amazon. I have a website that's getting ready to go up now, and it's not up yet. It's called Mama Ali Speaks. No, Mama Ali at .net. MamaAli.net. And you can go in there and get it.
MamaAli.net.
.net. It should be up in about a month. But you can go to Amazon and buy Undefeated on Amazon. But it says Undefeated, not the other one. It says Undefeated. So
Fantastic
you can go get
talking
that.
to you, as always. I could
You know what,
talk to you
George?
all night, but yeah. Yeah.
Yes. You know what, George? Is another thing for me is to make women aware, because women do so much for their men and guide them, and they should stick with them and support them. Don't run away. Just try to stick in there and try to support your man. Men are beautiful factors. They make a lot of mistakes. Of course, we all do. But forgiveness is very important. You have to forgive and try to be friends when you divorce, because it's just good for you. It's good for your soul. You have to forgive people.
Amen. Amen.
And I'm just
Thank
saying
you,
to
Doctor.
you, can I say one thing to you, George? I pray every day for the health, and safety for all people in America, especially in the Ukraine and India, Libya, and all the countries that have had turmoil, tragedies in the weather. And we are praying for everybody in the world for peace and guidance, and try to get closer to your Creator. That's most important. People always following this person, following that person, have an opinion about this person. Don't worry about that. The Creator is in control of everything, and you have to stay connected to your Creator and be at peace.
Amen. Dr. Ali, thank you. God bless you. And I hope that your latest book is an enormous success. You're certainly sold a few copies on here this evening, I'm sure of that. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's a must-have book, I would say. Should gender reassignment for children be a criminal offense? Yes or no? It's a simple question, really. And the answer is important, because we have allowed a state of affairs to obtain in the darkness, in silence, because we were afraid to speak out and say no, and say enough is enough of this mania. It's time now for everyone to step up to the plate, as Muhammad Ali himself would have done. YouTube comments on Dr. Ali's interview. Joe Jones says Ali did for boxing what Alex Higgins did for snooker, and many other great sportsmen did for their sport. God bless them all. Amen. And Morpheus X says, give me one dark athlete, or any athlete, that would give up his career for justice of humanity against the mighty imperialist empire of the US. They robbed Ali the best age of his career in boxing for refusing to fight in Vietnam. And Toby Clear says, when Muhammad Ali decided to be true to his faith and refused to join the army, the wrath of an entire republic was visited on his head. He was stripped of his title and not allowed to work. The words of James Baldwin. An email from David. I too watched the Rumble in the Jungle live from a cinema and realized very quickly that this would go down as the greatest sporting moment of all time. It is the greatest sporting moment of all time. I defy you to produce a greater one. The greatest athlete on the greatest stage at his greatest. Great show. I've never forgotten that cinema in Blackpool. And for those of you abroad, cinemas in Blackpool in those days, in the early 1970s, well, we're not talking the Ritz here. One more email from John. Really enjoying the interview with Dr. Khalilah Camacho Ali. I grew up loving Ali and remember getting up as a child at all hours of the morning with my late dad to watch Ali fight. There's only two celebrities that I cried for at their passing, John Lennon and Muhammad Ali. John from Ireland. I never finished telling the anecdote, I think, that my father and I got up in the middle of the night, and my father was the only white man in Britain, practically, who was supporting Ali. And I've never forgotten how we felt. I was just a kid when Liston didn't come out of his corner to continue the fight, and Ali became the champion of the whole wide world.
You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
Patreon.com/George Galloway. I really depend on the people who support me in Patreon, and I'm deeply grateful to them. And they're growing now really quite significantly. So things are turning up for us, and I'm really glad and grateful about that. Please support us for the price of a cup of tea in an insalubrious cafe. If you can afford that per week, then please do it. Patreon.com/George Galloway. Julie is one of the new patrons. Hi, George. Julie from Australia. I love your podcast, and I'm glad I finally found your show so I can finally hear people like you and your guests speak what I am thinking. Thank you, Julie. And Hafsa is a Moats legend. That's the highest level that you can be on my Patreon. Kids can't vote, drink alcohol, or get married before 18. So how on God's green earth can they mutilate themselves before then? Indeed. Terry says it's a disgrace that children are subjected to an agenda adults of a dubious mentality have dreamt up and unbelievably are rewarded with a platform instead of legal proceedings. The West truly is a lost cause and an empire on the precipice. And Derek Reed says, it's a total disgrace the way the woke society are becoming. I know a parent who was dressing her 2-year-old son in pink dresses, and hey presto, the boy is 10 years old and now a girl. There is no way that poor wee guy had any clue what he was at 2 years old. Professor Marandi from the University of Tehran has educated us all many, many times on the Mother of All Talk Shows. But when you look at the audience numbers, nobody ever gets tired of his quiet and exact eloquence. And I'm glad to say he's back on the show with us this evening. Professor, thanks again for joining us. We will look more widely at the global situation. But if I can start in your own neck of the woods, are the talks on nuclear questions between Iran and the United States going to happen? Will they ever restart? Or will this be just another casualty?
It's very difficult to say. The good news is that the United States put aside its preconditions for the prisoner swap. And so the Iranian prisoners and the American prisoners were released, and so were Iranian assets which were effectively stolen by the Americans, assets that were both in South Korea as well as in Iraq and elsewhere. A bit less, I think, than $20 billion were released. So the fact that the Americans put aside preconditions, allowed this prisoner swap to take place and to have Iranian assets released shows that changes are taking place. Those changes, of course, are largely, in my opinion, due to the heightened confrontation with Russia and with China, and the fact that the Americans simply have too much on their plate. But in any case, it is a good sign. Whether that translates into a breakthrough at the nuclear talks, that remains to be seen.
Yes, but when will we see it? I mean, is this something that's in the long grass and we'll know if it happens? Or are there any dates, any schedules that we can measure as having been met or missed?
Well, messages being exchanged between the two sides. So indirect talks between Iran and the United States do take place. And of course, the Iranians are talking with the Europeans. I'd like to very briefly just remind your audience what happened in the past. In 2015, Iran and the P5+1, which included the United States and its European partners, they signed a nuclear deal. And from day one, the Americans violated the deal under Obama. And as the Obama administration moved forward, they increasingly violated their side of the bargain. And so did the Europeans alongside the Americans. Whereas the Iranians from day one, they were very strict about all of their commitments. And the International Atomic Energy Agency repeatedly, I think 15 times maybe, stated that the Iranians are committed to all of their obligations. And then, of course, Trump left the deal. Biden despite promising to return the deal, he never did. And he continues with the so-called maximum pressure sanctions, which are targeting Iranian women and children. But in any case, when the new Iranian administration came to power, the talks were revived in Vienna. And I was in Vienna for the talks. They were very close to a deal after weeks of negotiations. And ultimately, at the last day of the talks in Vienna, the EU gave a text to all of the delegations who were going home. The Iranians took that text. It met Iran's requirements, except for three small points. The Iranians made some changes, 3 changes, sent it back to the EU. And then Joseph Borrell said that the Iranian demands are reasonable. At that point, we thought we had a deal because Borrell is an ally of the United States. But the Americans delayed their response. Then they gave a non-response. And it was because of the midterm elections in the U.S. The Biden team was afraid of Trump resurgence or resurging his supporters gaining power in the Senate and Congress. So they delayed, and then we had the riots in Iran. The Americans and the Europeans miscalculated. They thought something was going to happen in Iran. And so all of that we were delayed for a long time. So we really had a deal, but the Americans just couldn't take the final step. And today we are still where we were. But since the prisoner swap took place and Iranian assets were released, and as I said, the Americans removed their precondition, that is a positive sign. So it is possible that we may have a breakthrough in the future, but nothing is for certain because, as I said in the past, the Americans were unwilling to take that very last step.
Why bother, Professor? You've got your prisoners, you've got the stolen funds returned to you. You have closer and closer relations with the rising part of the world. Why bother with the part of the world that's sinking?
Well, that is a case that is being made by a part of the Iranian political establishment. They're saying that Iran has joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. More importantly, for economic purposes, it's now joined BRICS. And Iran has improved ties with Central Asian countries, neighbors in the Persian Gulf. And as you pointed out, they've signed a deal, or they've had a deal with the Americans to exchange prisoners and have their assets released. However, the Iranians are still hoping that the United States and the Europeans will come to their senses and they will be prepared to have some sort of reasonable relationship with Iran. But time is not on the side of the Americans. It's not on the side of the Europeans. They have too many problems. They have problems with Russia. They have problems with China. They're losing influence in Latin America and Africa. Even in our region, we see that they're having problems maintaining their hegemony. It would be smart for them to change their policy towards Iran, but it is very difficult for them to rethink their relationship with Iran or their absence of a meaningful relationship with the country.
Well, you saw what happened when they gave you your money back that they had stolen from you and made this prisoner exchange. Biden was severely attacked by Republicans, by supporters of Donald Trump, amongst others, who made out that Biden had actually given you this money as a gift, ignoring that it was your money that they had stolen. I mean, you couldn't make it up, but they did.
Well, George, one of the things about the United States is that once they go down a road, it's very difficult for them to go back. You know as well as I, you know better than I, that when apartheid South Africa was in place, Nelson Mandela, when he was in prison, the United States considered him a terrorist, and the ANC, the African National Congress, as a terrorist organization. Apartheid collapsed. Mr. Mandela became President Mandela. He was still a terrorist. He retired from office. He was still a terrorist. So was the ANC. And only, I think, in 2012, years after he left power, I think around 2012, did they remove the ANC and President Mandela from the books. So that's how the United States functions. It's the arrogance of power. That's why they simply can't retreat with regards to their policy in Ukraine or with regards to Taiwan or with regards to Iran. It's very difficult. I think a large part of it has to do with the arrogance of power. It has to do with empire. It has to do with this sense of exceptionalism that prevents them from being able to take a step back and to shift gear, to change policy, and to behave in a different way because they look down at countries like Iran. It's almost impossible for them to come to respect countries like Iran.
One of the difficulties they're having is with Saudi Arabia. It was a major part of the US government's plan to be able to go into the next presidential election with rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, recognition. Saudi Arabia joining the laughably called Abrahamic Accords, sacrilege actually. But the Saudis are refusing. The Crown Prince, MBS, or whatever his other faults, is doing something of a good job in altering course, a course which they've been on since their very foundation in relation to American politics. Is that how it's seen from Tehran?
It does seem that so far Mohammed bin Salman is sort of hedging his bets, that he sees that the United States is on the decline, like many others, and therefore he wants to improve ties with Russia, with China, with Iran. And also Mohammed bin Salman does not love the Biden team or Biden himself. So he does have a vested interest in waiting out Biden and perhaps even by keeping the price of oil up to hurt Biden for the upcoming presidential election. Of course, there are talks going on between the United States and Saudi Arabia about some sort of deal, especially with regards to Israel, the Israeli regime. We don't know where that's going, but without a doubt, we have seen a change in the behavior of Saudi Arabia towards the United States, regardless of whether there's going to be some sort of deal with the Israeli regime or not, because there's a lot of talk, but we don't see it happening yet. But there is a change, and I think we've seen it happen in Africa and Niger and the changes that are taking place there. In the Persian Gulf region, other countries are also rethinking their ties. Latin America, it's the whole global South or the non-Western world is definitely becoming more cautious about their relationship with the United States, their future with the United States. They feel that the United States cannot for some of their client regimes, they feel they can't be protected, and for other countries, they want to have better relations with others because they see change taking place. That's very clear in our part of the world.
If we regard a position of no war, no peace as the midpoint, how would you calibrate the state of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia today? Better than that, I suspect, better than no war, no peace, but how much better?
Yes, it is important. It is very important. The Persian Gulf is a very sensitive region. It's perhaps in some ways the most sensitive region in the world, because if there's insecurity here, the whole global economy would collapse. Saudi Arabia has traditionally been supporting extremist groups like Wahhabi groups. They supported the extremism that we saw rise in Afghanistan in the 1980s and the 1990s, Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda. And, it grew in Syria and in Libya, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, other countries in the Persian Gulf, and of course, Turkey had a huge role to play in the rise of these extremist groups in Syria. And of course, they still exist in northern Syria because the Turks continue to support Al-Qaeda and among others. So Saudi Arabia has done a lot to support these groups, and they've caused huge problems for the whole region. So the less tensions in the Persian Gulf region, the less incentive there is for Saudi Arabia to support such groups. Mohammed bin Salman, it would seem, by nature, is not a big fan of those groups anyway. So regardless of what he did to Jamal Khashoggi or to Qatar or to the former prime minister of Lebanon or the war in Yemen, a positive element of his leadership has been that he has distanced himself from these extremist Wahhabi Takfiri groups. So Iran would like to see better relations, not only because it's good for security across the region and it weakens terrorism, but also because this region, if it wants to develop, countries in the Persian Gulf and West Asia, they have to be able to do business, trade. They have to be able to at least have some sort of relative trust towards one another. And of course, there are many opportunities. The north-south corridor that Iran and Russia is developing, this is important to link because it will link Russia to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. The Saudis can make benefit of that. They can do trade with Russia. They can do trade with with Central Asian countries as well. So there is a lot that is happening, and the Saudis could be a part of that. And of course, the Iranians also have a lot of interest economically, culturally, religiously in having good relations with Saudi Arabia as well.
Finally, Professor, your president was in New York for the General Assembly. A hooligan sought to disrupt his speech, but was unceremoniously ejected from the hall. Quite extraordinary behavior at the United Nations, I must say. Did he, you think, take the temperature in America? I mean, you're in a difficult situation in Iran. Almost whoever wins between Biden and Trump, if that is the final lineup, it's not good for Iran. Both of them have committed egregious crimes against Iran. I'm wondering then if you're kind of hoping, like I am, that Robert F. Kennedy might make a decent showing. How do you think people in Iran view the upcoming presidential poll?
Well, if Robert F. Kennedy is able to leave the Democratic Party and step forward as an independent, he'll still have major problems because there are at least 10 states that will almost certainly not allow him to gather votes there. It's a very difficult process in the United States to get on the ballot across the country, but in some states it's more difficult than others. So he really has a very small outside chance. And as you know, recently he's become very hawkish and supportive of the Israeli regime, which I find very odd, taking into account the rest of his policies. They don't match at all. But so let's put him aside momentarily. It doesn't really matter, as you point out, if it's Trump or Biden when it comes to foreign policy, at least in our part of the world and most of the global south. Maybe with regards to the war in Ukraine, there would be a difference, but elsewhere, I think there's not really that much of a difference between the two. But as you pointed out at the beginning of the interview, the changes that are taking place, the rise of BRICS, the rise of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the shifting balance of power, which is taking place at a very rapid pace. And thanks to Western policies, it's speeding up. The war in Ukraine, I think, is pushing the change that we were all expecting and seeing in previous years. It's pushing it forward much faster than we'd ever seen before. It's quite stunning how rapidly things are changing. So I think that for Iran, the future does look much better. Actually, in the last quarter, the Iranian economy grew by 6.2%. Iran's relations with China, with India, with Russia are improving rapidly. So the situation in general for Iran is much better. And I think it is significant. You made you were speaking about the Israeli regime and their ambassador to the UN and how he tried to protest against President Raisi during his speech, and he was expelled from the hall, which was quite extraordinary. But I think even that is symbolic. It is revealing in that the Israelis are losing. I believe that the Israelis are becoming increasingly nervous about their future. This is sort of symbolic, and that's why his erratic behavior, I think, is sort of revealing. But when you look at the media in Israel, when you see what's going on, the divisions in Israel, how the Israeli regime is becoming unpopular in Europe and in North America, especially among many young Jews, I think that does not bode well for the regime. And that lack of self-confidence, the regime that used to be, have the invincible army, and they were they were the regional power, they dominated the region, or at least that's what we were told. That is no longer the case. And I think that itself is going to be ultimately an incentive. This weakness in Tel Aviv, it's going to create a greater incentive in Europe and North America to rethink their policy towards Iran. The world is tilting away from the West. They need countries like Iran because of what they've done to Russia and China. And the Israeli regime is having a much more difficult time than before in isolating Iran. So although I'm not naive. I don't think we're going to have good relations with the United States or the Europeans anytime soon. But the world is changing in a big way, but also in a subtle way simultaneously too.
Professor, thank you as always for a wonderful tour of the horizon, both in the Middle East and beyond. A legend on the line, Sarkar in Glasgow on NATO. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Good evening, George. George, today I don't know whether I'm calling because I'm angry or I'm sad. Angry because seeing the repeated mistakes of NATO, on and on, going on and on like clockwork, trying to provoke wars. Angry for that. Sad because there are some people who still believe NATO is a force for good because they learn nothing from Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. They learn nothing from Ukraine. They learn nothing from the latest development. That is with what is happening in Kosovo and Serbia. George, believe me, people who don't know, people who think that NATO only intervened and these countries are mentioned, they don't know what they did in Yugoslavia in 1994, 1993. They don't know that. And they still believe what NATO is doing is good. Kosovo and Serbia, Kosovo is a part of Serbia. I personally believe, and history proves it, Kosovo has been trying for separatism, but they don't know that in the land of Kosovo, which they call an independent Kosovo, there's so many Serbs over there. There has been a bit of fraction between them, which happens in every country. But for NATO to say that we'll now send our troops over there because they believe that the Serbs are going to take, are literally stifling the Kosovans and not letting them gain independence. George, that doesn't augur well. Every country who has been neutral or saying or exposed the hypocrisy of Ukraine or even being remotely associated with Russia for trade deals, they are being chastised, they are being humiliated. This Kosovo wound has been opened up again. I don't know what the future would be, George. I'd like to hear your views.
Well, I think that you should look on the bright side. The result of the election in Slovakia will not be the last such election. There's more than 1 million people on a demonstration in Warsaw in Poland today, all over East and Central Europe, all over Germany, and eventually all over France, probably not all over Britain, because we are backward in coming forward in that regard, but all over Europe, and I believe in North America, in the United States at least, and it will crystallize in the elections next year. People are comprehensively rejecting the NATO government's sacrifice of their own national interests and the prosperity and prospects of their own people in order to serve the diktat of the gerontocratic early onset Alzheimer patient sitting in the White House. People instinctively feel this is not right. This is not wise. This is not the proper use of our resources, and it might lead to disaster. That's why I believe when the Russian government, in the form of Medvedev, responded to Grant Shapps' cretinistic idiocy in the Daily Telegraph by making plain that Russia would regard not just any British military forces in Ukraine as a legitimate and legal target, they would be target number one. They would be the target of every Russian gun, missile, rocket, bomb, until they had been destroyed. I believe when Medvedev made that point on social media early this morning, that Rishi Sunak and his mandarins in Whitehall took fright. Now, of course, I'm not in second place to anyone in supporting Serbia in relation to this Kosovan question. And there is no doubt at all that NATO, failing in one area, is seeking to inflame a political situation in another. Kosovo is Serbia. It will always be Serbia. The world will never recognize the breakaway of Kosovo. The Serbian government will never, could never recognize the theft of a part of their own country any more than you or I, Sarkar, could accept that a thief could come in and take over the ground floor of our house, and we live upstairs in the top floor in cramped conditions, whilst they cavort downstairs in the best rooms in the house. You think we'd ever accept that? Well, that's what you'd be asking Serbia to accept, and they never, ever will. Captain Blimp on Assange says, I keep saying this, why doesn't the Australian government just give Julian diplomatic status? He will be able to go home without hindrance. And Frank Carlisle says, responding to the sycamore tree story, Costner was the worst Robin Hood in cinematic history. Who's the one I'm thinking of on TV? Was it Richard Green is a name that's in my mind. VJ says, there are many sycamore trees where I live, and it's known as Sycamore Lane. A lot of people are sycamore stories, so let's go on to Prince, the legend in Texas, on Canada. How's that for internationalism? On you go, Prince.
Hey, George. Good evening or good afternoon. So I have one slight thing I disagree with you on, but like I said, I've always wished you a great time. I have utmost admiration for you. So I look at the Nazi thing a little bit differently. You see, the Western government has never really had a problem with Nazism. It's just always I think the main reason why these guys never really liked Hitler was because he went against that global agenda. It's not they were cool with it. I mean, Churchill slaughtered 1 million people in India, slaughtered 1 million people in Kenya. So these people, de Gaulle did the same thing in Algeria. So they have never had a problem with genocide or the other stuff. It's just always been something which they use to scare people, which this whole Nazi thing. In America, you can't even talk about anything. They even accuse black people of being Nazis. They accuse everybody of being Nazis, except when it's actual Nazis, then they fund them, they sponsor them. So it's not even a mistake. It's not even something which now they pretend it's a mistake. It's not a mistake. They know exactly what they were doing. Nazis, after the Second World War, they took a bunch of them. You think they just smuggled them to Argentina by mistake? They took a few scapegoats, tried them in Nuremberg, and then the main ones, they actually incorporated them into Western government. They were in very high places. So Nazism has always been part of the Western ideology. I want to skip to the second point, which is about...
Well, look, Prince, no, I don't have time for your second point because your first point was so very good. I want to quit while we are ahead because of the hour. A good and clever friend of mine was just saying to me this very morning that in the United States, there are thousands of Holocaust memorials, and quite rightly so. The Holocaust, the greatest crime in human history, in the sense that its intention was to physically annihilate every single person of the Jewish religion, every single one. This genocide failed because of the Red Army, because of the victories of the Russian Soviet forces in the Second World War. And if that victory had not happened, then the Holocaust would have continued. But to go back to my friend's point, there are thousands of memorials in the United States to the Holocaust that took place in Europe. But there are no memorials to the Holocaust perpetrated by the Americans themselves against their native population. And precious few, even in high-heeled jacks, lipstick-wearing progressive outpost of Canada. And in Latin America, hardly any at all. But 100 million, 100 million original Americans were wiped out by European colonialism in the Americas from Canada to Chile. You try finding a memorial to that particular Holocaust in the United States. You'll look long and hard. There's a legend on the line. Last call of the evening. It is Norma in Bristol. Norma, what would you like to say?
Well, only a couple of points because it's very late now. I just wanted to say I enjoyed the ex-wife of Muhammad Ali. I thought she was refreshing and she had humor.
Wasn't she wonderful? Yeah.
Yeah, she was. And then just quickly, we did actually, like you, stay up and we watched the fight of Cassius Clay against Sonny Liston years ago. But you did say you wanted an update on my husband, so I'm just going to tell you that we visited him today, but he has to be moved entirely now by a hoist, which is, sad deterioration. And we're waiting to see if that government money for 3 months has been agreed. We know by Tuesday, so they can move him to a nursing home. But, after that, who knows? It would just be a blimmin' scandal if we had to pay or have means tested if he lived. We had to pay, for any money after 3 months if he was still alive. So that's my update. Well,
it's a very eagerly awaited update, albeit sad news. for all of us here at the Mother of All Talk Shows, and I'm sure all of the audience around the world, our hearts are with you and with your husband at this very difficult time in your lives after such a long and happy marriage together. God bless you, Norma, and preserve your health. Unfortunately, it's the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it tonight. I thought we had a couple of cracking guests. We had new callers dealing with some of the most important issues in the world today and the sycamore tree. That's all we've got time for, but the good news is, God willing, I'll be back on Wednesday at the slightly later time of 9 p.m. UK. So bring another viewer with you, if you will, so that we can grow and grow this open university of the airwaves. And follow me, support me on patreon.com/George Galloway. Why don't you? Good night.